In our last conversation, Harriet and her son Bob recounted on how Dr. Pilson traveled from Russia all the way into the United States and then later landing in Southern California. We learned about how he started off as a pharmacist but later became a doctor and opened up his own medical practice right here in the southwest community of Vermont Slauson. Now we'll continue where we left off in our last conversation, talking about the impact he made in his southwest Los Angeles community.
My father hated vacations.
Yes, hated vacations.
My mother wanted to go here and go there, and she finally got him to leave, but he was on edge the entire time they were gone.
Right, they'd have to get another doctor to come in and
usually then when my brother became a doctor,
and then then my uncle Victor, who went in there and went to work with him, and so that they would cover for each other, but they worked all the time, especially him.
I want to tell you something else. My father never had appointments. He opened the door of the office at 10 o'clock because he had worked all night anyway in the hospital. But he opened it all at 10 o'clock. There was a line of people around the hospital onto 57th Street from the middle of his office, and which was next to the hospital. That's how he worked. He did not make house calls. And everything was cash. He charged this one $5, this one $2, and then he had to treat a whole family for $5.
And like we mentioned earlier, it was like that same work ethic just impacted, like the number Harriet mentioned, 33,000, over 33,000.
He worked 7 days a week. He would work. The office opened at 10 a.m. and at 5 o'clock, he would go down the street to the house for dinner, which my mother would have to make him, and then he would rest from 5 to 7 o'clock, and 7 o'clock he'd go back to the office and hold that from 7 until 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And then he and my mother would go for a ride in the car, and then he would go back to the hospital or go back to the house at about 12 o'clock at night, and then he would try to go to sleep, but he would be awakened. He never slept more than 3 hours because he was awakened by women that were in labor, and they would call the house and call, doctor, the woman dilated, she's getting ready, and my father would shoot down the street and deliver 1 or 2 babies and then come back and try and rest some more, and then he would go back to us. This was his routine.
He did this throughout. My brothers, I have 2 brothers, the 3 of us. We traditionally had a Friday night dinner in the family, and we would go to either my mother would make dinner. We'd either have dinner prepared at our home, or we would go meet at a restaurant with my grandparents, Dr. Pilson and his wife, my grandmother, and every Friday night, and almost, I'd say at least half the time that he was there at dinner with us at a restaurant, he would get up because he was called or paged. He actually, back in those days, was so long ago, they didn't have pagers. He would get up and call the hospital to find out the status of everybody. Then he'd come back to the table and say, I have to go to the hospital now. And so dinner was over. That was at least half the time. He was never not working 7 days a week, except for once a year they would take a vacation, and they'd limit it to 7 or 10 days to go somewhere in the world.
I'm very grateful for both of you just taking the time talking about your family history. I could not find any of this in newspapers or any other resources, so I just think it's incredible to hear it.
You find bad stuff in the newspaper.
That's true, except there was that one story I still remember with the South Hoover Hospital where it was a MTA bus driver, or a bus driver whose last name was Hoover, that had twins at the South Hoover Hospital.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you what used to make the papers every year for South Hoover Hospital. My father loved to deliver New Year's babies. And he would, there was always somebody in labor. So he would hold off the woman till the last second. So it'd be exactly on New Year's, the last minute.
And I remember looking at those articles. It was like almost year after year, like New Year's baby. So I know he was.
Yeah, South Hoover Hospital, that was his claim to
I
fame.
was born in South Hoover Hospital
Yeah.
myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I had my tonsils out there when I was 5.
and my oldest son was born there too.
Wow. So, and again, like you said, he practically stayed there until he couldn't because he just really just believed in the work.
That was his work.
Thanks so much for tuning in for this episode of South LA Then and Now. On our next episode, Harriet will share a few stories from her childhood and growing up in the Vermont Slauson neighborhood, as Dr. Pilson as her father, but more importantly as a student experiencing a new, burgeoning version of Southwest Los Angeles. Harriet will talk about the schools that she went to and her experiences as a Jewish person growing up in Vermont Slauson. With that, see you next time.